Humans, as I'm sure we all know, are very social creatures, and it's because of this quality about ourselves that we are constantly communicating and learning from each other. Today we're going to be discussing the theory of symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism is a theory compiled from the works of George Herbert Mead, Herbert Bloomer, and Charles Cooley to explain how social interaction teaches us meaning and language and influences our formation of ourselves and our society. The three principles of symbolic interactionism that Bloomer proposed, as cited by Griffin, are meaning, language, and thinking. These principles are what symbolic interactionists believe are learned through social interactions, and will help us to form the concept of ourselves. According to Bloomer, as cited in Griffin, we act toward things based on the meanings that we give them. Everyone has a different meaning for things based on their interactions and their experiences, and how they view these things determine how they will behave when faced with certain objects or certain situations. An example I can give you that I discussed in my paper are roller coasters. Some people really like roller coasters and they see them as fun or thrilling, and if they see Goliath at Six Flags, they're probably going to want to try and get in line and get on the ride. For others, roller coasters really aren't their thing. They think that they can see them as scary or dangerous, and if they see Goliath, they're probably going to want to avoid getting in line. But where do we learn meaning? According to Bloomer, as cited in Griffin, meaning comes from our social interactions. We learn language and symbols from each other. Babies aren't born with the ability to talk. They have to learn language and how to speak from interacting with their parents or their guardians. An interesting thing about humans that Mead points out is our ability to name things and apply meaning to them to help us explain what those things are. And we learn these meanings and expand our vocabulary through interacting with other people. For example, here I'm holding a metal four-pronged object, or what we call typically a fork. But nothing about the word fork says this is a four-pronged metal object used for eating. And for someone who's never seen a fork before, nothing about looking at this object says I'm a fork and I'm used for eating. If you've seen Disney's 1989 film, The Little Mermaid, you know that Ariel, having never seen a fork before, doesn't really know what the object is and takes it to her friend Scuttle, who wrongly explains to her that the object is called a dingle hopper and is used for combing hair. This interaction, Ariel gains a meaning for this object as a symbol for grooming one's hair, which leads her to an awkward situation at dinner with Prince Eric. At some point in our lives, we learned from our parents who socialized us into proper table manners that the word for fork is a symbol for this object, and that we use it for eating. The last principle that Bloomer, again as cited in Griffin, explained is that our interpretation of the meaning of things can change with our thought processes. Sidney Brown in 2013 also explains that our meanings can change based on social interactions and because of everyday life. Because we have language learned from social interactions, we have a system of symbols that allows us to organize our thoughts and to give new meaning to things. And we can change our meaning based on new experiences or social interactions. Thinking back to that roller coaster example I mentioned earlier and discussed in my paper, say that a person who doesn't really like roller coasters goes to a park with her friend and he convinces her to get on a ride, and she finds that she actually enjoys the roller coaster. Because of her interaction with her friend and the experience, her perception of roller coasters has changed, and when she looks at a roller coaster now, she may see the fun experience she had before, instead of seeing the roller coaster as scary or dangerous. The concepts in symbolic interactionism that explain how we learn symbols and meaning through our interactions is then used by me to explain how interaction forms our concepts of ourselves. I focused a lot on this concept in my research paper. As cited in Griffin in 2012, Mead believed that the self is a combination of the I and the me. If I see a chocolate bar and I feel the impulse to devour the whole thing, that is my I speaking. The I is essentially that instinctual, unexpected part of ourselves that we can't really anticipate. The me, according to Griffin in 2012, is the image of the self seen when one takes the role of the other. We get our me from interacting with other people and seeing ourselves through their eyes. This is Charles Cooley's concept of the looking glass self that is defined by Griffin as the mental self-image that results from taking the role of the other. If I see someone who's eating an apple while I'm picking out my chocolate bar giving me a funny look, I might perceive that this person thinks of me as unhealthy or gross for eating this high-calorie snack, and then I might perceive myself as being unhealthy or being a pig for enjoying my little chocolate bar based on her perception of me. In my research, I found that Mead focused a lot on how social interaction forms our concept of ourselves. And according to Elizabeth Crawford and Catherine Novick in 2014, Mead proposed that the me is formed through a process of socialization called the stage theory of primary socialization. And this process is what we all go through during our development to form our me. The first stage that Mead proposed, as cited in Crawford and Novick in 2014, is the preparatory stage. And this is where children start to mimic their parents or family members to develop an understanding of different roles. If a toddler sees her mom talking on the phone, for example, she might mimic her mom's action by babbling into her own little toy phone. I remember when I was a kid watching my mom write, and I would take my own little pieces of paper and crayons and make little squiggly marks trying to imitate her writing. George Ritzer explains in 2015 that parents are very important in this stage because they are often the first social interactions that children have, and the responses to their children are what help the children form their first concepts of self-image, as seen in the concept of the looking glass by Cooley. The second stage that Mead proposes, as cited in Crawford and Novick in 2014, is the play stage. And this is the stage where children start playing with other children their age in role-playing games. Crawford and Novick give the examples of playing house or playing school. Mead cited in Crawford and Novick believe that this is where children start understanding the roles that other people play at the cognitive level. The last stage is the game stage, and this is where children play more complicated games with more complex roles. According to Crawford and Novick, this is where Mead believed children start understanding their role in society and their self based on society's expectations. Mead, as cited in Crawford and Novick, proposes an example of children playing a game of baseball, and in the game, children learn to understand their role as a member of the team and was expected of them as, say, a pitcher or a batter. And they also learn to understand the group as a whole and their goal of winning the game. In this stage, Mead believed that this is where we develop the generalized other. The generalized other is defined by Griffin as the composite mental image a person has of his or herself based on societal expectations and responses. I kind of like to think of the generalized other as the Jiminy Cricket on our shoulder that tells our me what is expected of us as according to society. The generalized other in my example with the chocolate bar tells me that society doesn't approve of overeating sweets and that I'm expected to seek out more healthy snacks. So, to summarize, symbolic interactionism explains how we learn meaning and language through socialization. Without socialization, we can't form a language that allows us to learn different meanings to evaluate ourselves or others, and in turn, we cannot form a concept of ourselves. Ourselves cannot be experienced without interacting others and seeing ourselves through their eyes. If one isn't socialized in the opportune moments of their lives, they won't be able to develop a language or concept of themselves. An example that shows this is in the cases of feral children. Feral children, as defined by Crawford and Novick in 2014, are children raised in the wild who are completely unsocialized. These children don't experience human social interaction, and without this interaction, they can't form a language or self. A case that shows this is the case of Jeannie. Crawford and Novick describe in their book how Jeannie was secluded in a room with little or no interaction from her parents, and when she was discovered at the age of 13, she couldn't talk and displayed behavior not typical of children of her age. Because she never had the interaction to teach her language and never had response from her parents, she could not learn to speak or have any concept of self. A quote from Crawford and Novick in 2014 states, "Children isolated from birth have no means of communicating with others, and thus they are unable to communicate with themselves within their minds. Without language, they have no capacity for role-taking or self-reflection, and they have no ability to evaluate the likely consequences of various courses of action. Thus, their behaviors are products of the I with which we are born, rather than with the socially derived me." These cases of feral children are truly tragic, but they help explain that socialization in symbolic interactionism is the key to developing our language and to ourselves. So, to sum it all up, Mead's theory of symbolic interactionism is what explains how our social interactions teach us meaning. We each have different meanings for things, and we learn new meanings and language through interacting with each other and having different experiences. Through interaction, we also gain an understanding of who we are by looking at ourselves through the eyes of those we interact with. Without socialization, we cannot form language or a me, and this idea is shown through the cases of feral children such as Jeannie. By studying symbolic interactionism, we learn about how we shape ourselves and our society by interacting with others.